The purpose of this video is to let you know a little bit more about TRU's draft sexual violence policy so that you have enough information to be able to provide us with a bit of feedback on that policy, and that will help us in the revision. So just as a bit of background, in the summer of 2015, President Shaver struck the President's Task Force on Sexual Assault Prevention and Response. That task force conducted its work over a period of 8 to 9 months, ending in the spring of 2016, and came out with a number of recommendations. In the spring of 2016, the provincial government of British Columbia also introduced legislation requiring a policy that all universities and colleges in the province have standalone sexual violence policies. As the task force had already been working on that, we were in good position. We'd been working on a draft, and we're just looking to see what the legislation looked like before we put forward our recommendations. So the recommendations from the task force included a draft standalone policy and a recommendation that the university immediately begin consultation on that draft policy so that we could be compliant with legislation by May of 2017. The other major recommendation coming out of the task force was that the university hire a sexual violence prevention and response officer. That person has been hired. She began in September of 2016 and will be providing education to the community and also working to support survivors who come forward to her looking for resources and support, as well as options for reporting either through criminal processes or through university processes. The other recommendations around communication, partnerships, consent education, and bystander education really are very much tied to the work of the Sexual Violence Prevention and Response Manager, and also are addressed in the policy draft. So a little bit more about the province's Sexual Violence and Misconduct Policy Act. It was passed in the BC legislature in May of 2016, and it requires that all public post-secondary institutions in the province and any private post-secondary institution with a residence have a standalone sexual violence policy in place by May 19th of 2017. As I said, we already had been working on this, and we're waiting to see what was in the legislation to make sure that our policy was compliant with that legislation. So the policy, or the Act itself, and there's a link on our website to the Act, provides a definition of sexual misconduct. It also sets out a requirement that all policies of this sort include procedures for making complaints of sexual misconduct, procedures for the university to respond to complaints of sexual misconduct, and then that there are procedures for making reports of sexual misconduct, as well as procedures for responding to reports of sexual misconduct. And the distinction here are that complaints are made by the person who was harmed by some act of sexual misconduct. Reports are made by third parties who are aware that some form of sexual misconduct took place, but were not the actual victims or survivors of that act. BC legislation also requires that there is a 3-year review of the policy, and that in both the review of the policy and in the consultation to draft the initial policy, there is involvement from students. We have been doing that so far, but we are also making sure that we consult more broadly with faculty and staff and other members of the community. The Act also empowers the Minister of Advanced Education to survey students around the application of the policy. It requires the university to report to its Board of Governors, in our case, on the application of the policy on an annual basis. Additionally, it refers to the regulation-making powers of the Lieutenant Governor and Council. Those regulations have not been provided to us directly yet, but there's a document that the Ministry of Advanced Education has provided all post-secondary institutions in the province to provide guidelines for policy development, and so we've been relying on those as we've done this work. So the draft policy that you can access on this website is indeed a standalone policy on sexual violence at TRU. It provides in its policy statements at the beginning of the document commitments to providing a safe place for study and work that is free from sexual violence. It commits the university to raising awareness of sexual violence, responding to the needs of victim survivors, and ensuring fair processes. The policy statement also recognizes that survivors' diverse identities and experiences, their intersectionality, and their diverse responses to trauma have to be considered in the university's approach to sexual violence. Draft policy also includes, under the regulations, a number of items, including scope of the policy in terms of what is the jurisdiction of the policy, definitions on key terms, educational commitments, disclosure and support options for the survivor, including the ability for the survivor to make decisions about how to proceed with reporting or if to proceed. So it's very much a survivor-focused policy. It provides an indication of interim measures that can be put in place, particularly when the victim survivor is making decisions around how to proceed with reporting. It outlines reporting options and the university's commitments to confidentiality, including limitations on those. So the next steps are, right now we're in the middle of one, which is the consultation on the draft policy that goes through October 31st. And at that point, we will be considering all of the input that we're receiving in a revision of the policy. That revised policy will go forward to the board at the end of 2016 for their consideration early in 2017, with the intention that we will have a policy in place and be compliant with the provincial legislation by May 19th of 2017. Along the way, while the policy is being developed, the manager of sexual violence prevention and response will be developing training for staff and students on topics ranging from consent education to bystander intervention to, and in particular for staff and faculty, to how to receive a disclosure of sexual violence and where to refer students to, if indeed that does happen in the course of their work experience here on campus. So we ask that you consider the following questions if they're useful to you in providing feedback on the policy. First of all, are there commitments or general principles that are missing from the policy statement at the beginning of the document? Secondly, to what extent do the regulations in the remainder of the document align with those commitments? And then finally, from your perspective, what might be challenges or limitations in adopting and implementing this policy within your group or unit at TRU? You can provide that input through the web form on this website, or you're also welcome to send an email to dean-students@tru.ca. Thank you for your time. If you have any questions about this process or about our sexual violence approach at TRU, please feel free to contact me at dean-students@tru.ca.